Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome Shannon Warner. Shannon, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Sugata. Thank you for having
I
me
met you
here.
about 6 weeks ago at a dinner, and we had some amazing conversation, and you've been kind enough to find time for me. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation here. But before we get going, it'll be
Yeah.
terrific if you'd please take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself.
Yeah, happy to introduce myself. So I'm Shannon Warner. I lead ISV Go-to-Market at Intel as part of our global partner team. And I have been doing this coming up on 3 years. I have a couple decades plus of industry experience. Actually, ironically, I started at Intel right out of college and am an Intel boomerang. Have done various roles in the company and sales and marketing primarily, actually some work even prior to this with software companies. And then spent some time at Microsoft where we had been doing a big partnership with HP and in the commercial channel space actually, and then started working with SYNNEX, and which led to a role to lead a large organization over at the SYNNEX IT distribution company. And that company merged with Tech Data and we became TD SYNNEX and worked a lot with ISVs, probably now coming up on over 10 years and working in the software space. And now I'm bringing together that software world with hardware and AI. And I can't think of a more difficult job in terms of trying to drive that solution, but I'm definitely here for it. And it's been really a ton of learning and a lot of engagement.
Amazing. So you've been in this very large ecosystem of various compositions. So before we kind of come to, what you're doing now and where you think things are going, let's kind of dial back. Let's go back, sort of, some of these ecosystems that you looked at. Let's go back a decade, maybe. A lot has changed. So in your mind, what did it kind of look like then? And how did it evolve over, you think, over the last decade when it comes to these large ecosystem that you work?
Yeah, that's a good question. So a decade ago, I had just started at Microsoft working with HP, with PCs. It was right at that time Satya had been leading the company for, I think it had been about a year or so. And when I moved over there, I remember people at Intel telling me, "You're so crazy. Why would you go to Microsoft? Microsoft is so, done, boring. Nothing's happening over there." And, to me, I really had been feeling the pull to shift focus into software. I had been at Intel for 17 years. I joined right in the dot-com boom in 99. So went through that whole piece where Intel was flying really high as well. And a lot of companies had, been going after that dot-com. Like it feels like that right now with AI and what was going on then. And then in 10 years ago, or 10 years back, 2016, Microsoft was reinventing itself. And so as was there about 3.5 years, I really saw the company transforming. There was so much energy. Like Satya had like monthly stand-ups with the whole company. Anyone could ask a question. There was so much energy that he was bringing into the company. And that was when cloud was really becoming a thing. And Microsoft really shuffled itself and went after that. And so I would say that was like the big thing that was happening a decade ago and what drove a lot of innovation within our industry, within the channel, within software, all of that. So, I would say that was the big thing that was happening
And
then.
what happened, do you think, in the ecosystem space as cloud came in as a major force of change? Did the composition change? Partner base change? Like what happened there in your mind?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely. I mean, and it's still changing now, but it created a new revenue stream for companies that were paying attention to it, that were embracing, they maybe were already part of, the Microsoft ecosystem, and then AWS was coming in and really disrupting things, Google, fast following there. And this whole MSP, managed service provider partner channel, really came up. And then you had the traditional, we're talking about channel right now, traditional companies also embracing that and standing up businesses. And that was, that's really exciting, I think, for companies because it's high margin business. It allows for a lot of new use cases to be realized. I think one of the things I really love about software is it enables empowerment. And that is a really key personal value of mine. And companies are able to harness that and bring new things to market in a way that they weren't able to before.
And ISV, was a sort of a central vision and word for the Microsoft ecosystem. And a lot of other platform companies now are focusing on it. Are there attributes that you saw unique at Microsoft that was possibly not there in other companies when it comes to building an ISV ecosystem?
I think it was really around the scale. I mean, even if you look at it now, I was actually just looking at IDC data and their software tracker. Microsoft is the single largest ISV in the world. And they, when I was there, they were talking about these different they had this sort of web of businesses. If you're in the data center space, if you're in the database space, if you're in owning the web, owning search engines, and they were looking at where are they number one at and how can they capitalize on that leadership across the industry to make those businesses even bigger. So they are just looking at things on just such a massive scale, more so than most other companies. I think there's probably just a handful of companies in our industry that look at it that way in terms of I'm building this business here, I'm building this business here, these over here. And then when they can be connected, they enable that much of a stronger, overall business.
So when you think of the attributes or sort of the elements of that scale, are there things that come into mind that would be very unique, that allows them to build to that scale?
I think what I would say on that is what Microsoft is really strong at is owning the enterprise and owning, you look at where Microsoft 365 was with Office, and I'm not going to date myself what it was prior to that, right? They continue to build upon what they were good at and the customer base that they focused on, and really understood what what the enterprise needs and how Microsoft, I mean, essentially we talk about like a moat. They were kind of a moat for the enterprise and on what it needed from a software perspective, my perspective.
And when you came to NX, like, well, how was it the same or different?
Yeah, it was completely different, I would say, on many different levels. I mean, just the breadth, right? When you go into distribution or even if you're at a SI partner, you're selling everything, right? And so you become less of an expert on a particular vendor or product and more of, I don't know, more of a I guess more of a partner and trying to drive a solution for a customer and trying to really understand how how what you're bringing can solve that. And then in distribution too, I mean, the customers or distributors are MSPs and VARs, SIs. So then it's also helping them with what they care about in their business. They care about margin, they care about customer ads and acquisition, and how can get the investment from a vendor like Microsoft or Google, which was another vendor I worked with, to be able to deliver on those objectives. And so it shifted things a little bit from that regard.
So, I mean, this issue, as I know them from outside in over the last 30 years, you had an inside out perspective, but traditionally used to be a bank and a warehouse. Then they started to add competencies, around lines of practices, all the way from business development to sales engineering and other sort of support. And then when shrink wrap software, then license management came about, then the cloud came about, they had less and less boxes to manage or ship. So what do you think from a dynamics wise, from a composition wise, how did distribution evolve over the last 10 years? Because I want to come and spend a few moments on, from your perspective, where you think it's going also.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I would say the cloud was very disruptive for distribution, right? And I felt that actually, so I managed the Google business at SYNNEX and TD SYNNEX, and that included hardware with Pixelbooks. That was the product that Google had, which was an actual product. And then it also included Workspace, or it was G Suite, and then it became Google Workspace. And then we started to develop the GCP business. So I actually had a kind of a lens on that where I could feel the comfort of traditional distribution to some extent around the support that was around me, around how Pixelbooks worked and how we made money on that. And then having to shift focus from, and also Chrome was a huge business that we had as well, which the Chrome licenses SYNNEX, and then TD SYNNEX is the largest distributor of Chrome licenses for Chromebooks in education and Chrome in commercial. And so each one of those businesses had a different, my team and myself, we had a different approach to how we would manage that business in terms of the margin profile, the revenue profile. And if you know anything about distribution, or at least TD SYNNEX cared a lot about margin. And so that was something that was always top of mind for me, is how do we maximize the margin for each of these different businesses? And it was kind of a different playbook for each of them. So, what I would say to answer your question around this transition and then the broader view is, you really had to understand what that vendor was trying to accomplish. So Google in that regard, and influence as many programs and investments as possible. And it became much more about competencies and driving competencies with the partner base, but beyond just that traditional resale model. And so we invested in a lot of programs and trainings and helping our partners obtain certifications and then getting rewarded for that from the vendor, and investing in participating programs like deal registration, where we could register opportunities and obtain a larger margin profile for those opportunities, and get incentives for ourselves as well as for our partners. So it was kind of different with regards to that, in terms of, at the end of the day, you want to understand what the vendor wants to achieve. You need to determine if there's enough money in it for you to participate. And then if you're in distribution, also for your partners, or do they care? How does this address the needs of their customers? So the recipe, I would say, is relatively consistent, but the components are different in terms of what go into
And
it.
where do you think now, with the hyperscaler platform coming in, and of course there's a pretty large rise of third-party logistics, 3PL. Amazon just announced, I think a couple of days ago, that they're getting into some sort of a 3PL motion. So how much of that do you think impacted distribution, or is it impacting distribution today?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the marketplace is huge, right? So that is one where, if you think about just fundamentally, instead of on-prem with data centers and shipping and selling servers, now that's all within a hyperscaler, and then, they're selling their cloud instances for that. Then for sure, I mean, from a distribution and resale motion, you're not getting that business in the same way. And so you have to embrace the cloud. And I know, in general, distribution is embracing the cloud, that they have built their own marketplaces. TD SYNNEX has their cloud marketplace. When I was there, I'm less close to it nowadays, but definitely, you have to really embrace those partnerships. And I would say that the company did a really good job of doing that with the three large vendors of Microsoft, AWS, and Google. But you have to do that, and you have to obtain the certifications yourself. So there were quite a few technical certifications that, as a distributor, we had to obtain with our building out of engineering and technical resources teams, as well as sales certifications, so that we were able to position those with our business development team to the sellers. And so it's, you have to shift and adapt, or you get left behind.
So we talked about kind of three components, and I'll come to the fourth one, which Intel has been, incredible at. So we talked about sort of, go-to-market, resellers, MSPs, so traditional partners. And then you kind of talked about ISVs. We talked about distribution. The fourth pillar is alliances, right? And Intel has been a master at this from day one. So maybe we can start deep diving a little bit into Intel, and as much as you can share and that you have shared publicly. So when you look at these components of an ecosystem and you sort of color that with these AI lenses, that's kind of, we're all looking at, what is happening in those four clusters? Like, what are the motions you're seeing evolving in the ISV ecosystem? Because there are not just pure play ISVs, then you have physical AI companies that have a large software components. Then you got partners, traditional hardware, software, but physical AI that requires deployment. And then distribution that has moved from hardware to software to IoTs to now looking at physical AIs, right? And then you, of course, have this alliance component that, strategically pulls a lot of those bundles together. So can you spend a few minutes on the alliance side, how it has evolved, where it is now, and then maybe we can talk a little bit about Intel. Very simple way, standard alliances, right? To build, because chips are built on standards and compatibility. So whether it's wireless chips, whether it's, security, their alliance is there from a standards committee. Then you have alliances of
Mm.
the classic Intel Inside, right? Market alliances. Then you have technology alliances because you have license. So, I mean, I don't know what the compositions are today, but the way I knew Intel, those are the things come into mind. So, from that aspect.
Yeah. Well, maybe I can address it from a partner ecosystem standpoint in terms of, so from my perspective, I've shifted my perspective, I would say, over the last 2.5 years since I've returned. I'm still doing the same role, but Intel has changed, the industry has changed, and my understanding of what we need to do has evolved with that. And, when I think about it, traditionally, maybe this is a way to also talk about it, is Intel has gone to market with its largest OEM companies and has built roadmaps with them. The OEMs have, for the most part, designed those products in, shipped them out into the market. Intel sprinkled some money in the channel, and everybody bought everything. And we had like 95% market share. Well, the world has totally changed now, and it's very workload driven, it's very AI driven, and we need to shift the script to really address the needs of the market and be focused on outcomes first. And that's really the big thing that I'm driving within the company is we need to focus on the customer outcome. We need to map that to the workload that Intel unlocks and delivers. And then we need to bring our partner ecosystem together to build those solutions so that when we go to the channel, when we talk to a Morgan Stanley or whatever end customer, we have something that isn't just this is the Intel chip, but this is the whole solution that the Intel chip delivers upon. And that is not easy. And that is what I'm working on right now. And so when I look at, kind of when you think about it from an alliances perspective, we've got our really large ISVs that we work with, like a Red Hat or a VMware or an SAP is driving a ton of workloads in the cloud, to some of these disruptive ISVs that are coming through. We just were at Computex last week and we had Perplexity on stage with us and looking at driving like local AI on AI PCs and, addressing some of the needs of cost and sovereignty, et cetera, in that regard. And then we still have our big OEMs that we do a lot of business with, and they're trying to transform their businesses too, whether they're talking in the AI PC space or the edge AI space or in the data center. That is huge. And then we also have big hyperscaler partnerships with Microsoft, AWS, and Google. And actually, AWS is probably where we have the tightest alignment from an ISV perspective. They're very strong with ISVs. And looking at where we can win workloads with Xeon 6, that's our product that goes into the data center. And then ultimately, what we really hear from our SI partners and our distribution partners is, we want a solution, especially in AI. They're like, who are the ISVs that are going to deliver meaningful enterprise outcomes and enterprise workloads that you've already tested Intel, it's optimized on your silicon with one of our OEMs, and it's somewhat pre-packaged and ready to go. And so that's where I'm spending a lot of my time right now within the company to try and solve for that. I don't know if that answers your question around alliances. I feel like I've got, the whole partner ecosystem within Intel that we're trying to do this work with, and we're getting, a lot of success in certain areas. In other areas, we've got a lot of work.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I want to go back to maybe a couple of swim lanes that you talked about, like Red Hat VMware type of swim lane versus your traditional OEM swim lanes. And then maybe walk us through when you talk about these outcome driven, what does it really mean at the end customer level and the stakeholders into that delivery chain that you're sort of driving, and then bring in the dimension of AI, like, because, that's being questioned quite sincerely and seriously by every players. So
yeah. Where do you want to
let's start
start?
with the Rainmaker or those type of programs that you have in Red Hat and VMware and etc. How does it look like? How do you work together? Anything that's public, kind of walk us through. How do you measure outcome?
Yeah, I think probably, I mean, I could talk about SAP. We just had SAP Sapphire was just hosted their big partner event. And there's a lot of things that are happening. I mean, SAP, I think, has been pretty public about wanting to, be embracing into the cloud, right? And that's something that, we as Intel are working on with them. And, it's important in that regard to have really strong alignment with the hyperscalers on, making sure that the product is priced in a way that SAP is willing to purchase and SAP customers are willing to purchase, depending on kind of how they're going to market there. And then also making sure that it's highly performant on that architecture. And we have various software frameworks that we use to optimize those solutions so that they not only just work as is on a Xeon 6 processor, but that they are optimized to work best. And so those are things like AMX, advanced matrix extensions. We have software engineers that work really diligently and closely with these of the world or the Red Hats, VMwares of the world to make sure that is the case. And then, the piece that I'm working on right now with that team is how can we increase the co-selling across SAP and AWS, for example, and how can we do that in a way that, because it requires trust in terms of sharing those opportunities, how do we get the buy-in on both sides that we can do that, and then assure that we have incentives aligned across the sellers so that everyone's aligned that this is the workload that we want to get behind and drive. And so that's some work that the team is working on right now, and where we want to see continued focus.
So if we stay in that lane and maybe double click on some of the plays, whether it's demand gen, whether it's selling or co-selling, can you share a little bit about how does that like program look like, processes, people, platform structure, like how you go to market behind those plays?
Yeah. Well, and so the prime, the play would be around the workload. So SAP Rise would be the workload. And last year, we as a company implemented a deal incentive program. We called it deal registration. We're now calling it a deal incentive program. And it was the first time that Intel's had anything like this. Because if you remember what I was telling you, our traditional model was like, if we build it, they will buy it, and everything's great. And now we have to really compete to win in most every market. And we need to have a more, there's more partners that are involved into this whole, there's more alliances that are involved, to use the word that you're using. And we started with ISVs, actually. It was my team that raised their hand and said, we need this. And one of the big reasons we raised our hand is because ISVs don't buy Intel silicon. And so, wanting to justify our existence within a company that was operating in the way that I described, we said, okay, let's do this deal incentive program, because then we can start to measure the impact at the deal level and demonstrate this is an ISV workload actually drove the purchase of this customer, demand. And so we started with ISVs, and we work with an external company. We decided, actually, Intel usually likes to build everything themselves, Intel IT, and we were able to buy something off the shelf to do this, and which allowed us to go a lot faster too. Because if you have Intel IT, it immediately starts talking in like months and years versus like days and weeks. And so from start to launch, I think it probably was like probably about a quarter, I would say, of real work to get our deal incentive program launched. And so it's been about a year. And one of the things that I've recognized is that because these software companies don't actually buy the silicon, and they don't even ship most of the time the system, they're an influencer, they're a deal sourcer. And I need to connect the dots with whether it's the hyperscaler or the OEM or the channel partner that does. And so that's the work our team is doing right now. And so I don't have the full answer to you on exactly how that works, but it's the work ahead.
That's amazing. So let's switch to the other lane, like the classic Intel lane, the OEM lane. And you're a leader in edge computing when it comes to all these endpoints. Cost is rising at the core. Everybody's questioning, why do I need to run this basic query through the most latest expensive model? Why can I not run it on my device? So what do you think the opportunities are that you're addressing at the moment through the ecosystem at an endpoint tied to an outcome? Can you talk a few?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially if you talk about edge. So when they say edge, they're also talking about a PC. So within Intel, we have our PC business and workstation business. And then we have our edge business, which is a unique business that's run. It's actually embedded within our client compute group, but it is run separately. So if we're talking about that edge business, it's very vertically focused, and it always has been. And I would say we put a lot of resources actually in that team. There's specific kind of they call vertical business units that are focused on those areas of robotics and manufacturing is a huge opportunity for Intel. We're really excited about it. We actually just announced OpenVINO is the software framework that we use for ISVs to optimize on Intel, and it's kind of managed and housed in our Edge business unit, but also very applicable on the client side. We just announced a robotics OpenVINO toolkit to address the opportunities there because we have so many companies that are just coming out of the woodwork, so to speak, of wanting to address this need with robotics. And our Core Ultra 3 series product is very well positioned there because it has the GPU, the CPU, and the NPU to do those types of workload processing on the edge. So that's a huge opportunity. We're also seeing we have always had a very large retail business, and that's definitely incorporating AI and opportunities for on-device inference. And then in the healthcare space is another area that we're very focused. And then even in public sector, in the federal space, drones are a huge thing right now. We're seeing a lot of business for that. And just, in these regulated industries in particular is just driving a lot of need. And I would also say just in general, where, we've all, I think if we've been talking about this for a while, there's all this work that's done in the POC stage, right? We're going to go do this POC, whether it's in the cloud or not. But then when you go into deployment, you start to think about the cost and the latency and the security and governance, and it starts to become overwhelming and just not untenable. And so that's where I think this edge compute, and especially with AI, we're starting to see even more kind of momentum in that space.
So the next question is more about like seeking advice for a customer that just literally got off the call. They're about, $100 million edge device company. They're an Intel partner because we have an NDA. I'm not disclosing that, but I'm sure you know them very well. They're growing around 26% a year, rapid growth, driven by what's happening in robotics and automation and the edge computing that they provide. Only 9% of their revenue comes through channel. So I was on the call with the CEO asking, how do I build, double my revenue from 150 to 300 through an ecosystem, right? So if you were talking to that CEO, what would you think he needs to think through next 18 to 24 months from program, process, people, platform wise?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that investing there will help them for sure. But I would say, the way I'm actually doing a bunch of work on this right now. I'm looking at our ISV strategy and almost from a clean slate to say, like, what should we do? And it kind of reminds me of this. And also when I talk with OEMs, this is how we try and find our alignment is, what use cases, what outcomes? Like, what is it that you're trying to do? Where are you finding the greatest success? And starting there. And then trying to understand, the competitiveness of their product in those different areas. Do they also have, sometimes a scenario that works in one use case or vertical can work in another vertical. So is it transferable into another area? Is that area experiencing great growth? How similar is it in terms of how you're going to market? Would you want to expand? The other piece too, also, and I don't know what this OEM's kind of ecosystem looks like from an ISV standpoint, is are they working with ISVs? Which ones are they working with? Do they want additional partnerships there? And I do also, this is where because I kind of feel like that a lot of these OEMs that are in existence have been around for decades, and they don't talk in the language of ISV, and they don't know who the ISVs are. So I find that use case is the easiest way to do that translation of what are you trying to do, or what is your customer buying? What is the outcome? And then we can kind of work to see, okay, what are the ISVs that are doing well in this space? And maybe there's a partnership opportunity there. And I will say the majority of ISVs do not want to do hardware. It's sort of like a means to an end from their perspective. So I would say that. And then for sure, like the low hanging fruit on that is probably channel, is, understanding what channel they're working with today. If you have that understanding on use case and customer, there's an element of being able to map the right types of partners that are selling into that customer base so that you can have that partnership. But then I would say that OEM is going to have to significantly think about, if they are going to do something in the channel, how that is all working, right? Because it sounds like it's primarily a direct sales motion. They probably don't have any, it's probably limited on the channel friendly kind of program. And it does require investment. So, they will have to think about how to stand that up and whether or not they're willing to make that
In
investment.
your
Yeah, we do. I mean, I would say some of the really large companies, it's a mixed bag. I would say like the Siemens is an example of they deliver their own system and the software together. So we call those kind of like vertical OEMs, or where it's a combined solution. And then you have others that are like Epic Healthcare Systems, like they're just a software company, but huge. And, I think it's mixed. If they're smaller sized, actually, it kind of just depends. I think it depends on how they're doing it. I mean, most of the ISVs I work with are more pure play software companies, but then if somebody's very embedded in a specialization or an industry or vertical, they might actually deliver the full system themselves because it's so tied in and intricate in terms of the software and hardware components that need to work together. They may not ultimately make the system, but they might OEM it through somewhere else and be responsible for the full servicing and delivery of it.
So maybe we can double click a little bit on the program side. Are there specific programs you in place for ISV that are different today than were not there before? And are they driving that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a couple different things that we do with ISVs. I've taken a huge co-sell lens to what we're doing with our ISVs because we just haven't done that before. But my organization manages a couple different programs related to ISV. One, we have what I would call more of enterprise ready ISVs, but that we haven't put a super firm requirement on the size of that company. Roughly, we look at 10 million and higher ARR ISVs to work with. And we're in the process of really narrowing that to be enterprise ready ISVs that we can introduce to our partners, our OEM partners, our channel partners, and bring those solutions to market to drive real enterprise workload demands. And so what's entailed with that is I have a team that will do account management for those ISVs as well as engineering support and software optimization. Like I mentioned, some of the software optimization frameworks we use. And then we get them in our Intel Partner Alliance program, which is part of the partner program that my organization is a part of. And then that unlocks the opportunity for go-to-market and co-sell. And we're investing in a couple different areas on the go-to-market side. We have internally, we're calling it an app pack, but it's the solution bundle is probably the best way to talk about it, where we are working to assure that these ISVs are t-shirt sized or validated on OEM systems, and then being able to create collateral and position those solutions for channel partners to be able to deploy to their end customers or position to their end customers. And we're starting with outcomes. The one that we're working on right now is with HP and in the federal space. This is in the market with a number of SI partners today, where we've taken 3 ISVs, 2 of them that are focused on agentic and generative solutions in the military scenarios, and then a governance and observability platform that's also positioned there. And this is based on a lot of feedback that we've gotten from our partners and customers in this space. And then we worked with our HP team to fund seeds and AI PCs. This is for AI PCs and enable partners. And we want to do more of that. And then I mentioned the deal incentive program that we have. ISVs, if they show their pipeline with us, they earn incentives on deals that they've closed with Intel and with our partners.
So I want to kind of take the next 10 minutes and talk about AI, but from an outcome perspective, because there's a lot of discussion that's happening. Goldman Sachs published a report, I think about 3 weeks ago, saying that enterprise are not still seeing, at least not being able to connect the dot. Token consumption has gone up, substantially. Cost has gone up, but they're trying to connect the dot to outcome. So if you take one or more of these swim lanes that you discussed, what are the measure of outcome? Like, what is the conversation tied to the use case that you're talking about that you're seeing are real?
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I was just reading about actually Microsoft internally had been using Claude, I think it was Claude Cowork, and they're like, everybody is moving over to Copilot. We can manage those costs because the costs were just insurmountable. They were way higher bill than what they were expecting to pay. And so, yeah, I mean, those are the things that we're looking at. We're looking at token costs or time to first token. It depends on, those are kind of the standard metrics that we'll look, across the different use cases. At the end of the day, we're looking at, is it going to save money? Is it going to make money? Or is it going to make the people more productive? And you can apply that across the different industries and verticals that we work with. And so we make that as part of that engineering and software optimization work. We do a full technical statement of work with an ISV to confirm that it's going to meet the criteria that we've said that it's going to meet. And that's available for our partners and customers to see, so that when they apply it into their own scenario, that it meets those needs.
Over the last couple of decades, Intel has created a very strong foothold in cybersecurity, right? The back-end infrastructure that you provide, computing capability that you provide. And AI is being used in the product, but also being used to attack, right? So are you seeing any movement, the ISV partners that you have, Zscaler or Palo Alto, whoever those people are at the big scale, like how are they looking at outcome when they look at AI compute? Because their costs are going up too.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not as close to that. I mean, we do have some strong partnership in the ISV space. CrowdStrike's probably one of our largest partners in our AI PC market. We certainly work with the Palo Altos of the world and what have you. I'm not as close to how they're thinking about that. I know that it's really, and I don't know if you're thinking about them as companies themselves or customers, but it's definitely a key element when customers are evaluating AI and when they go from that POC stage or proof of value stage, POV, to deployment, that the security piece becomes a sticking point. And so what I'm seeing is that a lot of our ISVs are starting to partner with these security companies or assure that their product integrates nicely so that they can say, okay, if you deploy with this security ISV, then it's going to address the concerns that you raised with regards to attack or what have you. Yeah, that's how I would answer that. It's like security, and then there's the governance around the AI. There's key elements that we have a lot of these companies that we work with that are delivering generative or agentic. Like there's a ISV I work with that someone just told me it took them a month to develop a product. I'm like, okay, but is it secure and is it well governed? Like how are we assuring those that it's enterprise ready? And I think that's a key element in terms of that with the security ISV. They play a key role in assuring that not only will the AI work, but that it'll be secure.
So let me come back to sort of your team, your domain when it comes to AI deployment. You're at the forefront driving the technology platforms. What tools are you using in your ISV programs? What tools are you giving to the partner when it comes to AI native applications or AI enabled applications? Can you share some of those?
In terms of from a sales enablement perspective, are we
What
using
your
AI?
teams are using? What tools are you using that you can share? What applications that you're enabling the partners with that are using AI? Where are you seeing traction that's adding value outcome wise?
Right. Well, I would say, I mean, for us, we're trying to use AI internally and test some of these generative and agent capabilities before we give it to our partners. So it's definitely on our roadmap to be able to incorporate that as part of what we want to give our partners, because there's so much information on Intel when you're talking about tech specs. I'm actually rebuilding our ISV landing page right now and trying to figure out, what do we actually want to just put out there initially. And ultimately, we really need an agent that our partners can interact with so they can ask the question and get the answer versus trying to navigate the website. So that's on our roadmap for sure. Internally, we use Teams and Copilot. So I've been trying to spend a couple hours a week digging in with AI, and our organization is doing a lot of different work too. We were just in a meeting this morning about all the work that everybody's doing and how do we centralize that so we're either not duplicating effort, and then also making others aware of the great work that's happening and using AI as part of your workflow. I think that's the key thing. It's defining and understanding your key partner workflows and how you can give them the best tools for doing that. And that's not my scope at the company. I have a peer that does that, but we talk about that.
Can you share a couple of examples that are not confidential that you're using internally in your teams that you're seeing, like one or two pervasive example and one of one or two that you're thinking to giving to partners?
Yeah, so I actually just this week I created an ISV strategy agent because I've been spending way too much time on that on my own. And so I've been using that, and actually I'm just using it personally, but I'm on the cusp of sharing it with my team actually maybe today or tomorrow because I want to get their feedback on it and see if
And
they
what
can
is it?
start engaging
What does
with
it
it
have?
because
What does it do? Like, what are you trying to?
well, so because I've personally been doing this strategy work, and I actually get a lot of energy by working with partners. I don't get as much energy by doing strategy, so this is actually really helping me. And so I created a prompt, and I did the whole thing. Others probably know this, like asking the GPT for the prompt. So I started with that, and then kind of revised it based on my operating model. So I have an operating model with ISVs and incorporated that. And then, yeah, I'm still learning all these different capabilities, but the agent can do these
And
different
what attributes
tasks,
are in
right?
it?
So I,
Like, are you looking at their market? Like, what are the things you're digging up that you couldn't do?
yeah, so I have a number of documents my team has published in terms of like our enterprise ready ISVs, in terms of the overall strategy or our plan for the year. I've given it access to all of my documents and have said anything over 12 months old, ignore it or don't include it in feedback because things are just moving too fast. I don't want old documents. And then we have, I'm
Yeah,
still feeding it is kind of the idea. But yeah, so that's what I'm working on right
perfect.
now.
And any
Yeah.
other example partners?
For partners, I don't think we're there yet. We don't have anything from an AI standpoint that we've put out. There is internally, we also have a kind of a technical document agent that we call Vita. And I've been pushing my partner counterpart to make something like that available to our partners. That if we're using it internally, let's also make that available externally. I am not in compliance and security and all of that. So that, we need to go through those stages in order to turn it on. I mean, I would love to hear from you too. Like, are you seeing other people incorporating this or any best in class things that Intel could benefit from?
So there are internal tools that cases that you just talked about, business planning, QBR planning, financial projections, probability wise, because that's where these models can do well, right? Give you a range, give you an exact number. So a lot of them are being used for planning, for pulling in data and aggregation. So the use case that you talked about in strategy, not just strategic planning, but also account planning. So I think that we see a very common use case. On the partner side, recommendations engine, pathways. So when a partner logs into a rich portal like Intel, and a lot of things, they just see what they're supposed to see. Education is another one. Fraud prevention in incentives and another one. So there are multiple, point use cases that are rising, but it all ties to cleanliness of data. But I kind of want to flip that question around and say, if you had a Genie, AI Genie at Intel, give you 3 wishes that would make your partners incredibly productive, what those 3 would be, if you had to guess?
Oh my gosh. Well, so one of the things that we're working on right now is translating where Intel technology can perform the highest with what customers want in terms of workload and what ISVs we've optimized to do that. And so that would be one. And it's also one that I get a lot of questions from our SI partners, like who are the ISVs you're engaging with in healthcare and what is their enterprise readiness level? Those would be
Partner
those are, is that
partner
two
match,
questions?
partner
Sorry.
identification and matching competency.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yes. And maybe that related to that would be, I get the question of I'm an HP partner or I'm a Dell partner or a Lenovo partner. You name all the partners. So I'm interested in that hardware. What ISV solutions work on that hardware and which ones of those are focused in the retail sector? Like those would be like if I could get a Genie doing those things, those would for sure be high on the list in terms of what I get from from partners. That's more of kind of the recipients of it for sure. And then yeah, those would be some good ones I would say
Well,
for
with that
sure.
note, I have to get you set up for a demo now, but keeping that aside. But Shannon, thank you for being here. An hour flew by. I have to have you back. And there's so many things you're sort of cooking up. And hopefully I'll meet you at one of Rob's events. But again, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, that sounds good. No, thank you so much, Sugata, for having me. I really enjoyed the time.